Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Every Sunday, one of your pastors stands in front of you and spreads the seeds of gospel grace. In the preceding week, we pour our hearts into preparing for it. We immerse ourselves in the scripture text. We prayerfully read and listen for the Spirit's whisper. And we talk about it with as many of you as will let us. Then we craft every word until it feels comfortable in our mouths and sounds true in our ears and conveys what we believe the Spirit is saying to this particular congregation on this particular day in this particular context. Then we show up week after week and we speak it. And for all our preparation and care for the words, that is as far as we have any control whatsoever. All we can do is sow the seeds. That's what the sower does. We have no control of the words once they leave our mouths and hang in the air and fall into your ears. We can't control or even know the condition of your ears as you hear or don't hear or reject the words. Maybe you're having a really good soiled day and your heart is receptive to what the Spirit is saying in these words. But then again, maybe today isn't that day for you. We don't know which of you is experiencing a hard path in your heart that makes these gospel seeds of grace just bounce off. We aren't aware what thorns and weeds of worry are squeezing you. You know what your worries are. We're unaware of what rocks in your life are making it impossible for the joy of the gospel seeds to take hold. Private pains, heartbreaks, loneliness, feelings of guilt, feelings of shame or anger. Maybe you'll hear the good news of today and the seed will germinate in you only long enough for a respite before your private pains wither the joy that took a brief hold. Some of you tell us about your rocks, weeds, and hard places, but for the most part, we don't know what's behind your faces and in your eyes. And on top of all that, on any given Sunday, Pastor Eric and I walk in here with varying degrees of those same rocks, thorns, and birds hovering overhead, ready to swoop in and devour whatever joy we might have in sowing the seeds of gospel grace. We are, after all, in the same human condition as you are. Gosh, it's a miracle that there even is church. It's a miracle that anybody can ever hear it, much less preach it. So now that I've gotten you thoroughly depressed and you're looking sideways at your pewmates to see if there's any sign that they recognize your weeds and thorns, I'll turn the corner. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all placed this parable first of all the parables. Maybe that's because Jesus had just lived it. As he went all around sowing the gospel seeds, he saw all those things: rocks, weeds, thorns, birds, behind the faces and in the eyes of his hearers. In the chapters leading up to this, we read about the disciples who lost faith during a storm at sea. Pharisees conspired together to discredit Jesus. He spoke about being called a glutton and a drunkard. He was called Lord of the demons. And he and the disciples were continually harassed for breaking Sabbath rules and hanging out with the wrong people. And yet still, he spread those seeds of the gospel everywhere to everyone. He didn't examine every heart to determine its receptivity before carefully placing one seed at a time. He recklessly flung seeds all over the place, on good soil and troubled soil, among and in spite of rocks, weeds, thorns, and birds hovering above the path. The gospel seeds are for everyone. The good news is for you, no matter what condition you're in, today or tomorrow. If he had stopped to study the demographics of the soil and tried to come up with the magic slogan or perfect program, the gospel would never have spread, and we wouldn't have it. He didn't use his energy and resources and hope to try to convince the dying sprouts in the rocks to snap out of it and get growing again. He didn't beg or cajole the hostile ground to allow the seeds to grow. He accepted the reality that not everyone is going to get it every single time. In fact, a lot of people aren't going to get it a lot of the time, which is why our sower will never, never, never stop sowing. God is an eternal sower who will not stop scattering the seeds of gospel grace until every hard-packed path is receptive, fertile soil. Maybe this is the parable that leads the way of all the parables because Jesus himself needed to be reminded to just sow the seeds and don't worry about the results. Maybe he knew we would need to be reminded too, because the first, most important thing is to get the seeds sown. Open up the package, dump them in the dirt, put on some water. The children know how to do that. And don't worry about the mixed responses, no matter the evil one trying to snatch, no matter the persecution. That is what he calls his followers to do. That includes your pastors who preach every Sunday, regardless of your soil conditions, regardless of our soil conditions. This call includes you, every one of you, rocks, thorns, fertile ground. You're called to spread the seeds of gospel grace. Sow the seeds, scatter the gospel, tell the good news that you know. Fling the grace in every direction, to every corner, indiscriminately. We can't tell the condition of the soil where the seeds land. We can't know the condition of the hearer. We're just called to sow. That's what the sower does. Sow. But Jesus didn't leave the parable with just the sowing. No. He didn't leave it with the hard ground. He finished it with a promise that it's not all just work for work's sake. The parable ends with a miracle, a huge miracle, a wild promise. For those seeds that fall into receptive, fertile soil, there will be a miraculous harvest. In that time and place, a harvest of 7% or a 7-fold harvest was typical. A 10-fold harvest was superabundance and cause for huge celebration. A 30-fold harvest would feed a village for a year, and a 100-fold harvest would set that farmer up for life in a luxury villa on the Sea of Galilee. If the story had ended with just a 7-fold harvest, that still would have been good news. But no, 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. Not because of our brilliant sowing, but because of God's faithful growing. We are called to sow seeds recklessly, not concerned with the growth that might or might not follow, not even concerned with the condition of our own soil at any given time. The sower's job is to sow. The growth is the job of the master gardener who has given us the seeds of gospel grace in the first place. And these seeds are abundant. There is a never-ending supply of gospel grace and love. And they are for everyone. And with the seeds, there's a huge promise, a miraculous harvest, one in which I believe every ear will hear, every heart will grow, every single life will be a verdant garden filled with the fruit of God's gospel grace. That is the promise. Sow the seeds.